historian to the field of honor. Before we engage CollegeBoard in glorious battle, you must have a means of defeating them, like my mighty Mjolnir. Come, let us go to the arsenal to construct your thesis.
Just like Thor's hammer Mjolnir, your thesis serves as both a means of defeating your adversary, which is CollegeBoard in this case, and also helps you get to where you need to go. There are 3 strategies that you can use in wielding your thesis just as well as Thor wields Mjolnir. Strategy 1. The big event. History is full of powerful moments that completely change the course of human events. The purpose of this strategy is to capture that power. To prove that power, you need to find an event which is strongly related to a political, economic, religious, social, innovative, or artistic factor. Then, you emphasize that event's importance by explaining how the power of that Persia factor impacted other Persia factors in the time period. To guarantee your thesis point, you need to organize your Persia factors from most important to least important while explaining why they're in that order. So since this is a continuity and change over time LEQ, the big event strategy requires that you open with change instead of continuity. Because the reason why it's the big event is that it changed history. So any big change can work here, but to really make the thesis clear, the big event strategy will say something like this. From 1492 to 1676, the biggest change in the Columbian Exchange was the destruction of political factors in North America, and the biggest continuity was in European colonization, since the defeat of indigenous nations allowed for European countries to take over territory once owned by those nations. Finally, the second biggest continuity was the mistreatment of the indigenous, which was caused by the defeat and colonization of indigenous lands. This is clearly not the only thesis you could make with this time period in evidence, but I picked this one because I clearly explained the connections between the Persia factors, and that's the key to bringing lightning to your thesis.
While the big event approach might be a mighty blow against CollegeBoard, you may find after 3 hours of test taking you do not have the strength. Fear not, warrior. Here is another strategy to help you.
Strategy 2. The strong structure approach. In this strategy, you are explaining the differences in how power is distributed between one Persia factor and the other 2. This distribution of power is what makes these events happen. Therefore, in a CCOT LEQ, you would open with a continuity instead of a change. So if I were to use this strategy to build a thesis for this prompt, it would be, from 1492 to 1676, the biggest continuity of the Columbian Exchange was in political conflicts between Europeans and the indigenous over land and resource use, while the biggest change was in the reshaping of North America's political landscape. Finally, the next important continuity was in the presence of slavery, which stemmed from the European use of resources. Notice how political factors are present in both continuities and changes. You can do that approach if you like, but you need to explain the difference and the connections. Once again, this is not the only thesis you can make using this kind of strategy for this prompt. So let me know in the comments below how you would use this strategy to build a thesis.
Many times on the battlefield, it is not strength or flexibility that earns victory, but perseverance. With that said, this third strategy may be exactly what you need to achieve victory on a thesis.
Strategy 3. The slow and steady impact. If you can't find a big event in the time period, but you know that Persia factors eventually change from the start of the time period to its end, then the slow and steady approach is good for you. In this strategy, you analyze how a slow change in one Persia factor over the time period directly impacts 2 other factors. Little by little, as one Persia factor changes, so do the other 2. So in a thesis on the continuities and changes of the Columbian Exchange, you should open with your biggest continuity and explain how it brings about your biggest change. With that in mind, you could argue something like this. From 1492 to 1676, the biggest continuity in the Columbian Exchange was in social factors, with the massive deaths of indigenous populations, and that dramatic drop in population caused the biggest change, such as the political collapse of indigenous nations due to their inability to resist. Finally, the second biggest continuity was in economic factors, with the exploitation of indigenous land, culture, and resources all caused by their mistreatment. Notice how I use the term caused in describing the connections between my Persia factors. Now, even though that's technically a different historical thinking skill, causation, you can mix and match historical thinking skills if you are clear in your explanation of how borrowing from the other skill helps you answer the historical thinking skill in the prompt. You got 'em.
The power of Mjolnirs is yours to command now, young historian. Take it. You have earned it. So what other components of the APUSH history test are giving you trouble, young warrior? Let me know in the comments below. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm scheduled to fight something called a Klingon. Glorious victory will be mine. Until next time.
Hello again. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you are a teacher, resources for this topic and so many others can be available on my Teachers Pay Teacher store, Sci-Fi High School. And if you like this video, take a look at the channel. In addition to APUSH history stuff, we got stuff on psychology, creative writing, Hawaiian history, and a lot more in the future. So with that said, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and see you next time.